Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Founders Cut. Today I'm here with Ethan Pierce, co-founder and CEO of Adaptive Reader. Before we talk about what Adaptive Reader is, I start every one of these episodes by asking for the founders to kind of introduce themselves. So Ethan, however you want to go about it, let the people know who you are and how you got here.
Hey everyone, and thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm from Maine, grew up on a farm, one of those farm boys who ended up moving to Boston, going to Harvard undergrad and studying the humanities there, but quickly moved into entrepreneurship, raised some funding out of my dorm room my senior year of college, and got hooked. So I've been around a few 0 to 1 companies now, either as a product manager, product designer, our founder, and started a new adventure last July with Adaptive Reader. I'm so excited to be on the show and share a little bit about the learnings.
So you grew up on a farm. Did you do a lot of the farm work then too?
Yeah, did some farm work. I've shoveled some manure in my day, and picked a lot of apples. So love
You
working
know,
with the hands.
people might not think of it, but when I think of farmers, especially the ones that are still around today, I think of like how low key underappreciated they are as business people, right? Like to be able to survive and make the moves when necessary to adapt and take on new technologies when you might not be used to it, just to continue staying up to speed. So, I'm not surprised that your farm upbringing led you to starting your own company in your college dorm, and now obviously just starting your own company. So, tell us more about this new company that you started last year, Adaptive Reader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that I've been circling back to for a long time. I was one of those kids. I failed every spelling test I ever took. I got the lowest score that you could get on the SAT writing section, even though I did very well on the other sections. And I went through K-12 and college with undiagnosed dyslexia. I've never really been able to sort of fully overcome that challenge with writing, even though I did make some great strides with reading, and I'm very comfortable there now. But I just sort of recognized that if a couple of teachers hadn't leaned in middle school and high school, I could have had a very different academic journey, very different outcome, and a very different life. And so this core question for me, that I've continued to come back to is that language shouldn't be a barrier to learning. And right, irrespective of whether or not, it's a student who speaks another language at home. And so there's this sort of linguistic barrier, or a neurodiverse student who, is challenged either with dyslexia, or something else. How can we support every student, particularly in this age of AI, where I think what AI is really great at right now is actually communication and communicating in different ways to each of us to meet those styles. So how can we reduce language as a barrier to learning, and create a more equitable outcome for all learners?
Would you say that what you're building today wouldn't be possible without the boom in AI that we experienced in the last 24 months?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Newzella, which some of the audience may be familiar with, they started in 2012, raised 172 million in funding, and they've manually rewritten 10,000 news articles at 5 different reading levels. They're in 90% of US K-12 classrooms now, so it sort of proved out that there's a huge demand and interest in helping every learner engage with content that's the same information but written in different ways. But certainly the ability for us to not only do that with long format content like novels and textbooks, but also in dozens of languages is something that wouldn't be possible without this new wave of AI.
Yeah, I think sometimes right time, right place. Imagine what they could have done with $100 million that they had AI to do some of that work. They probably could have done it for like $1 million instead, right? So kind of cool that you get to ride that wave of product market fit that they created, but utilizing the new frontier of technology. So talk me through a little bit about how the product works. So if you are a teacher, a parent, a school, education system, whatever you want to call it, like how do you utilize the service?
Yeah, so right now, our sort of beachhead market, what we're focused on is novels for high school students. We see a lot of potential beyond that, but for example, this is a copy of Frankenstein that's been rewritten to a sixth grade reading level and then translated into simplified Chinese. So this is our Mandarin version, and the teacher can hand this out in class or use our online web platform where students can see the original text side by side with either a leveled version or a leveled version that's been translated. But the teacher can say, like, hey, everyone go to passage 123. And we have these little passage numbers in the margins. And now the student who's reading it in Pashto is at the exact same spot as the student who's reading it in Mandarin, who is at the exact same point in the story as the person who's reading Mary Shelley's original words. And the idea for this isn't that we stick to that level or that language. Really, the goal for this is to make sure that every student, irrespective of their language background or neurological differences, is able to fully comprehend what's happening in the story, what's happening in the content, participate in those critical thinking discussions, and then leverage their understanding to decode that original grade level English text.
Tell me a little bit more about the early days of this. Um, what what was the catalyst that got you to, you know, get off the sidelines and turn it into a company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when OpenAI sort of brought ChatGPT in the world 18 months or so ago. I was a director of product management at Fidelity Labs at the time, building new fintech products. And I was like, wow, this just changes everything. And there are going to be so many interesting companies here, and there's such a learning curve for any of us in product design or product management or in entrepreneurship in general to be working with these new models. And I was like, I want to be there in the action and learning that with something new and gritty. So I started playing around with a few different ideas. But for this one, I really thought first this was going to be a digital first tool. I thought I was going to focus on leveled English versions of the novel. So the first thing I did last April, when I was honing in on this idea, I reached out and set a post up on Upwork, hired 10 teachers to do, but I didn't know at all, to do little interviews with me. And every one of them asked, will there be paperback versions of these books? And that was a big aha for me that we've sort of validated further since then. And post-pandemic, there's been a massive shift back to print, which is something you're not hearing about a lot with the age of chatbots. But also, we learned through this process that so many of the students that we're helping are actually those multilingual learners. And that is a massive problem. So in Maine, where I'm from, Portland is a town of 75,000 people with 53 languages spoken in the school system. So I think those were a couple of things, both like the need for print and the need to be able to take the power and potential of AI tools and bring them out of the cloud into analog materials that in the way teachers want to interact, into the shift to really focusing on these emerging bilingual students and how do
Yeah.
you help them engage with the classroom. Um, those
Yeah.
definitely weren't, ideas that I had at the time, but were great learnings.
Growing up in a family that had to go through the same struggles that you're talking about, especially like you said in your town of Portland, Maine, where 53 different languages. Yeah, you throw 53 different languages into a room and then expect them to all learn at the same pace and using the same system. It's so broken, and so very cool to see something so innovative and elegant, right? It's not like you're trying to do complex, rocket science. Obviously, like it's not easy to build the system you're building, but intuitively it makes sense what you're doing, and there's a beauty in like the simple ideas that can be executed. Um, I want to rewind a bit because you said something interesting that I didn't know. Talk about your entrepreneurial journey. What was the first startup that you came up with in your college dorm room?
Yeah, so it's funny, had this question the other night at a dinner, and I think my very first entrepreneurship journey was when I was like 4 years old. And I started selling flowers from our garden at the end of the road. And by the time I was 5, I had franchised and hired another boy in another neighborhood to sell our flowers. And so I think growing up in a family of blue collar entrepreneurs, it's just always been baked in to do these funky little things. In college, and this is back a minute ago, I got really interested in alternative asset classes. And so this is back before Bitcoin was like mainstream. And so we dreamed up um, a way to securitize fine art and antiquity assets to allow for fractional ownership. Um,
Oh, how
so
long ago was this?
yeah, this is back in like 2013.
Oh shit. Well, that dream of yours, that vision of yours, they brought it back to full scale in 2020, 2021 with fractionalized art on DeFi and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I think spent a couple years working on that, and big lesson.
Just too early. You were ahead of your time.
Yeah, no, and that's the hardest lesson, or like a hard but great lesson. That timing is everything,
Yeah.
and the only thing worse than being late is being too early, and we were definitely too early with that one. Um,
Yeah, I'll bring it back to something that I went through, right? Back in 2016 when I was kicking around the idea of spinning a company out of the university system that I was a research fellow at. We had this grand idea that we're going to help create better patients for healthcare systems by preparing them better for upcoming visits. And we wanted to start with kids. And back then, a lot of people would say like, "There's no money in kids." That's kind of like the hush hush tagline in the healthcare industry because you make more money keeping old people alive, as morbid as that sounds, or as cynical as that sounds. And so our idea of like, oh, let's try to get in front of long-term chronic illness by better educating, younger generations, right? Fast forward, spun a company out, and then after 3.5 years of bootstrapping, went full time on it, and then COVID hit. And then up until that point, everyone was like, I don't think there's a business here. I don't think there's a business here. And then COVID hits, and everyone's like, "Oh crap, we need to do a better job of engaging patients at home. Like, we need to educate them better. We need to get them more committed. We need to do all these things." To the point of like timing is everything. Like at that point, being a bootstrap company and then getting put on ice, it was kind of like the final nail in the coffin. But then I look at startups now that are doing stuff in the healthcare sector, and they're all like patient empowerment, educating patients, and also I'm like, yeah, 6 years ago, no one cared about that. They only cared about like putting another pacemaker into somebody's body. Now it's all like, oh, what can we do to use technology to get to the patients at home? And so it's just hilarious to hear like you're not the first and you won't be the last, and I won't be the last either to say like, man, just wrong timing, right? So, good lesson for people out there that are trying to start companies and frustrated. Sometimes it's about being opportunistic too, on like when you push an idea forward. You would have never done this 15 years ago if you had to translate everything by hand, right? And at different levels too, multiple levels, different translations. You'd have thousands of iterations of something that would take you years to do just one book. So it's kind of crazy. As we look forward to the future, part of the people that I want to engage on this platform is like investors that don't know the potential of a market, like paint a picture of like how big of an opportunity this is that you're chasing.
Totally. I think, right, folks are often wary of US K-12 educational investments because it can be hard to sell into schools. I think one thing I learned early in my career, so my first sort of product job after I wound down that startup was at Vistaprint, in their innovation arm. And I learned, wow, you can plug into these third-party print-on-demand providers and have incredibly high margins on custom print products. And so we look at this sort of global market, right? Like migration is at a all-time high. We're already getting inbounds from places like India and Japan and South Korea, who are interested in these sort of multilingual print products. And print is key, right? And the ability to customize that. And so I think when you think about when you start making a shift from this limited sort of high school or even US K-12 segment and selling directly to schools, to start thinking about, wait, what does it look like to actually plug into some of these large legacy print operators that are not technology companies, that don't have the infrastructure for this sort of thing, and being able to not only level and translate in print, but the back of our books have a QR code now where you can pull up a digital version, and we'll be introducing high quality AI generated audio
Mhm.
across these languages. So I think there's just a huge amount of potential for us to be maybe not the only part, but a really big part of how we take content and make it personal in print and digital around the globe.
Love it. Talk to me about, and this is just from position of pure ignorance, like the IP side. Like if you're rewriting some of these novels at different levels, the idea itself remains, but the words that are used are different, right? They're from a different perspective, whether it's AI generated or from a human. How does it work when it comes to like a book that the copyright is owned by somebody else? Like what does it look like on your side?
It's a great question. I think right now we're really focused on books that are in the public domain
Okay.
in the United States. Public domain law varies country by country. So we've taken a pretty conservative approach on focusing on books that are very globally within the public domain. And we have 300 or so of those novels that are in our backlog to level and translate. I think beyond that, can't say who, but
Sure.
we have had some really great conversations with very large incumbent publishers that they're trying to grapple with these questions
Yeah.
as
And
well.
yeah, that sounds like the right approach. And uh obviously from a business perspective, these are probably revenue generating opportunities that these publishers never would have dreamed of or even thought of from a capabilities perspective. And so huge opportunity to leverage that in a positive way. Um, what are some of your goals moving into the end of this year? Like, do you have any cool milestones you're trying to hit, or partnerships you're trying to unlock? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, great question. So we're a 10-month-old company. We're pretty new, but we've hit some really exciting milestones in terms of early product market fit traction, both with school adoption, and then also at the more senior level with both some of these publishers and large school systems. So that's really exciting for me. I think a couple of sort of big milestones where we're closing out our pre-seed round, which is exciting. We're working on getting 100 novels in market by the end of the summer, adding our multilingual audio to have that full sort of end-to-end print digital audio experience. And so I think that the big goals for the rest of 2024 are to press forward with getting that content out there into schools, showing that traction within market, and getting that first sort of publisher contract underway.
I love it. You know, selfishly speaking, what I would love is a version where I could toggle between languages pretty freely. So I hear a paragraph in one language and I can hear it immediately after in another, just to kind of compare and contrast and try to learn on the fly as whether I hear it or read it, right? It'd just be kind of cool. Like I think there's so many great use cases that are at your disposal once you get the initial stuff off the ground. So obviously, how can people learn more about your product and services?
Yeah, so on that prior note, just quickly, within our web application, and anyone can log on. Our six Shakespeare novels are always free. We rotate a couple of other novels that are free every semester. And if you log in and create an account, you can actually see that side-by-side version, or you can see it in English on one side,
That's
and you
cool.
can see it in another language on the other side. So we have that, which is exciting, and that native language audio will be coming out this summer. And for folks that are interested in what we're doing, you can just go to adaptivereader.com. Feel free to send me a ping as well. It's ethan@adaptivereader.com. And always love hearing from folks, hearing their questions.
Nice. And I'll put that up in the description. Two-part question. Um, one is, who are the types of folks you're trying to get connected with today? So if people in my network are those people directly, or they are 1 or 2 degrees separated from them, and they're interested in making like a serendipitous outcome happen. Like, who are you trying to get connected with at the moment? And then the second part of the question is, any advice for first-time founders or just founders in general that might be uh, earlier than where you are that you wish you would have known yourself?
Yeah, great questions. I think to answer the first one, we're really focused on high schools within the US market, especially high schools that have linguistic diversity. So this isn't the places that you would think, or just the places you would think, like NYC, Philadelphia, Chicago. We hear this all the time for schools in Colorado and Minnesota and Maine. So if you know educators or administrators at those high schools, would love a warm intro. And I think that's the biggest thing overall, or if you're plugged into that publishing space, and know some folks who would be curious about the technology we're building and how they can apply it to their existing IP, definitely welcome that. Um, I think for the founders out there, especially the first time founders, I think the hard things are, um, or the hardest thing for me was coming to terms with the fact that the product that you're building, as much as anything, is yourself. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. That first time around, like so much of whether or not you win or lose that first time does come down to timing and does come down to luck. And I think a lot of founders, I know I myself, as a high achiever, took it very personally and to heart. And when we had to close that venture down because we recognized the timing wasn't right. But now I look back and I'm actually really proud of myself for recognizing that the timing wasn't there, and didn't drag that out longer, and prolong that play and churn through more cash. So that's a valuable lesson, a really hard one to learn. And maybe some investors out there would disagree. But I think focus on the fact, as you're going through this process, that you're honing your skills as a founder to identify those opportunities, to understand timing, and all of the other micro skills that you build day to day. And whether it's this venture and the timing works out and you seize that opportunity or the next one, it hasn't been a waste of time. Like you've learned so much.
Yeah, I think that's important, and it's something that isn't said enough in the startup spaces. Failure is okay. Within the parameters that you tried your best and you tried to execute on what you told their investors that you were trying to execute against, right? So if you had a thesis in mind that both you and the investor agreed it was worth chasing that thesis, and the thesis came back to be incorrect, that's okay. Investors should be okay with the founder that tried to prove whatever they were going to prove and it didn't work out. We all should know the risk that's inherently involved in early stage venture. I think, so as long as you're doing what you said you're trying to do, failure is part of that whole process, right? So hopefully investors are willing to, be fine with that as a potential outcome. So I think you're right. Founders need to understand that it's okay to have that happen. And you're right. Looking back on when I shut down the company that I was working on, some of the darkest days were shortly after that experience where, you know, you're beating yourself up, you're wondering what could have been. Uh, but at the end of the day, you look back on it now and you say, I learned a lot from it. and I won't make those mistakes again. And hopefully I can stop others from making those similar mistakes. And so the net impact, while from like a financial perspective, might not be immediately seen downstream, like maybe you help five other founders avoid that. Maybe you help yourself avoid that in the next two or three companies that you try. So totally couldn't agree more. Um, Ethan, as kind of we wrap this up, any last things you want to mention, shout out, talk about, give you an opportunity to throw anything out there that you want to?
Yeah, I think just following up briefly with a final thought on that, I think the difference between a really green founder and someone who's been at this a time or two is the growth in this capacity to recognize that that initial thesis, parts of it are going to be wrong, right? Like my initial thesis with this, that it was going to be focused on English language leveling, that it was going to be digital, right? And so part of what you're learning is how to like interrogate that and also where to see when the market is telling you that part of the thesis is wrong, but there's something adjacent that you've learned that's really valuable and insightful. And I think in terms of the shout outs, I'm just so grateful to my co-founder Eric Hallstrom, who's been an incredible sort of technology thought partner, and then just a whole host of mentors and investors that have been along the full journey. So really, really grateful.
Well, Ethan, I want to say thank you again for taking the time to talk about the opportunity that you're chasing after. It's one that actually matters in society. So, kudos to you as someone that's been through that process of figuring out a new language. Obviously, when I was really, really young, it feels like forever ago, and many other people that I know in my life that have gone through it or continue to go through it. Glad to see that there's some new solutions being thrown out there that might not have been possible just a few years ago. So if people want to check it out, they can just head to adaptivereader.com and check out one of their free books that they have, and see if it's for you or someone in your network. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on.
Alrighty.